All right. It seems like the 90s was about archaeology, and paleontology to an extent. Because you had Jurassic Park was a big deal. Indiana Jones still had a bit of clout going on. A lot of Indiana Jones stuff came out in the 90s, especially the early 90s. But for the late 90s, you couldn't go without thinking archaeology and not thinking Tomb Raider. Lara Croft is just like one of the iconic video game characters. And for good reason. Some of the best 3D games ever made are Tomb Raider games, at least in my opinion. And with the release of the Tomb Raider 1 through 3 remaster, I wanted to talk about the Tomb Raider comics from Top Cow. Now, this is a reprint from Dark Horse, who had the rights for a time. I don't think they do anymore. In fact, to be honest, I don't know who has the rights to Tomb Raider comics. But back in the day, these were released by Top Cow, and you can tell there's a look that Top Cow comics have that no one else really did until Fathom became a thing. I don't think Top Cow's a company anymore, but they're Fathom. Well, Aspen, I should say. Aspen Comics. Aspen's the main character of Fathom, the comic, which is one of, like, the Top Cow comics from back in the day. Now, we're going to talk about the Medusa Mask Saga. And this is the first 4 issues of the Tomb Raider comic. And it was written by Dan Jurgens, pencils by Andy Park, inks by Jonathan Sybil, colors by Jonathan D. Smith, letters by Dennis Heisler. Lara Croft is going after the Medusa mask. She's hired by an old billionaire who was a friend of her mother's, and she and her butler are going to track it down for personal reasons. Now, the big thing with the Top Cow Tomb Raider comics is that Lara Croft actually has more of a character. You might be thinking, are you sure with this picture and this art, which this art is just wonderful. We'll get into the art in a minute, but yes, these are very well written. Dan Jurgens is a great comic book author. And just putting him in charge of this story, he gives Lara Croft a backstory, which is that her parents and fiance all died in a plane crash. This has since been retconned at least twice, because her mother died in a plane crash, then her father was killed by Trinity. Trinity was never a thing until the last decade. But especially with the last couple Tomb Raider games, we've really gone away from the Top Cow image of Lara Croft. Where, yes, she is a little vulnerable, but she still holds her own, and she doesn't go, oh, woe is me, constantly. Like a certain psychopath that from Rise and Shadow of the Tomb Raider, looking at you, modern Lara Croft. Woman's a nutcase. She's a complete sociopath. Just blatantly murdering everyone with a bow and arrow. In this, she's more of an action hero. So I guess a different kind of sociopath, but one that I appreciate. Gunning people down, throwing one-liners around, It doesn't take itself too seriously most of the time. But when it does, we get some interesting perspectives. The first issue is from her butler's perspective, but then we move into Croft's perspective and why she raids tombs, which is going to be a common theme throughout this comic series. And I'm just so excited to talk about it. We can't not talk about the art. If you're a Top Cow fan, you get it. And I'm one of them. There's something about Top Cow's art that is so cool and so nice to look at. I think that Top Cow gets mixed with like grim fairy tales and stuff, where that That's like almost a pervert comic, or like Heavy Metal Magazine, which we know that I am a fan of that. But that Heavy Metal Magazine specifically made like to have erotic stories for the most part. Whereas like this Tomb Raider story, yeah, she's really attractive. Yeah, she's posing in all these ways that human beings don't pose in. But that was the 90s. That was all comics in the 90s were like this. And if you can't get over that, then you're not going to like these comics. Personally, it takes me back to like when I first started seeing comics. And I should talk about this comic in particular. Because I saw this trade, a couple Tomb Raider trades. This would have been about 2001. I saw a few things that day that I didn't. One of them I knew it existed, which was the Star Wars manga. I discovered these. We were on vacation in Keene, New Hampshire. Now, if you don't know what Keene is where the Robin Williams film Jumanji was filmed. So a lot of you have seen Keene. So all the like the outside stuff that's in Keene, New Hampshire. It's a beautiful little college town on the East Coast. Highly recommend visiting it. But we were like in a comic book / bookstore. Like it was like kind of a nerd shop, and I'd never been in anything like that because I grew up in the woods basically. Grew up in a really small town. We didn't have anything like that. So it was really cool. And I saw the Star Wars original trilogy manga in there, which I really wanted because I used to see the ads for it in Star Wars Insider all the time. But I was 7 and my mom was not going to buy that for me. She was paging through something that is coming up real soon, which was the graphic novel for Empire Strikes Back. It was a vintage graphic novel of it. And then also, I see these Tomb Raider comics. And after being told not to touch anything, after I started paging through manga, thinking my mom was probably thinking I was going to turn into a giant weeboo. I don't know. I just said, oh, those look cool. That's that game that I see on the TV. And I'm not allowed to play. Because I used to watch... I had a VHS tape. It was a marathon of the comic book show The Tick, the animated one. And I had a bunch of episodes that aired on Comedy Central. So that's how I found out like how South Park exists. I know this is just weird in the weeds crap here, but that's how I discovered Tomb Raider existed. And the Tomb Raider ad campaign, there's never been anything quite like it since. I think the only thing that comes close is the ads for Star Wars Bounty Hunter were almost as cheesy as the Tomb Raider ads were. But yeah, I looked at those comics and then I never saw them again. And it wouldn't be till these started coming out, these archive editions, Dark Horse was releasing. I think it was for Rise of the Tomb Raider. I don't know. It was for one of those games. It was to promote stuff. And they released 4 volumes of this. So it collects all the Top Cow stuff. That I was really interested. I bought all of them. Never read them. Well, I read the first one. I read the whole thing of this one. And I never read the rest of them. And then my house burned down. And this has been a slow burn to try to collect these. And I don't have all of them at the time of filming this. But I am trying because these are so worth your time to check out. And if you can't find these, then a lot of the Tomb Raider comics from this run got put in trade paperbacks that you can probably pick up. Also, there are like collections that have the comics, but they're in black and white if you so choose. But I think the coloring just adds another layer for this series. But anyway, what would I rank this? I give it a solid 5 out of 5. This is like the prime example of what late 90s comics should be. Like in the good department. You know, because there was a lot of bad comics in the 90s. This is not one of them. But anyway, have a good one.